After 2 years in combat, Ethan Walker finally returned home. But what he found shattered his world. The night was unusually quiet as Ethan stepped out of the cab. The house stood before him, familiar yet different. New curtains, a fresh coat of paint, and a garden that no longer bore his careful touch. His heart pounded as he pulled his duffel bag over his shoulder. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home early, hoping to surprise his wife, Sarah, and his son, Jake. But as he approached the front door, something felt off. No lights were on inside. The porch, once adorned with their family nameplate, now displayed a different surname. His chest tightened. Was this a mistake? Had he been away so long that he barely recognized his own home? Before he could knock, a voice broke the silence. "Daddy?" Ethan turned sharply. His 8-year-old son, Jake, stood a few feet away, clutching a small soccer ball. His face was a mix of joy and hesitation. "Jake!" Ethan dropped his bag, rushing to his son. He expected the boy to leap into his arms, but instead, Jake stood still. Ethan knelt down. "Hey, buddy, it's me." Jake bit his lip. "I thought you weren't coming back." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What? Of course I was coming back. Who told you that?" Jake looked down. "Mom and David." Ethan froze. The name sent a jolt through his veins. David, his childhood best friend. "Where's Mom?" Ethan asked, his voice dangerously calm. Jake hesitated before whispering. "At the church. Getting married." The world around Ethan blurred. The air thickened. His ears rang, and a slow, burning rage crawled up his spine. Married. To David, his wife. His best friend. His home. His life. Taken. Ethan inhaled sharply and stood up. He wasn't the same man who had left 2 years ago. War had hardened him. He knew how to fight, how to wait, how to strike when the time was right. But this was personal. He grabbed Jake's hand. "Come with me." "Where are we going?" Jake asked, looking up at his father's storm-filled eyes. Ethan clenched his jaw. "To stop a wedding." The church doors swung open with a thunderous creak, silencing the murmurs of the congregation inside. All eyes turned to the figure standing in the doorway. Ethan Walker, a man who had been declared missing by some and forgotten by others. His presence was both unexpected and undeniable. The scene before him was surreal. White flowers adorned every pew, their fragrance masking the tension that now filled the room. At the altar stood Sarah, his wife, or rather ex-wife in spirit, and David, his supposed best friend. They were frozen mid-vow, their faces pale as they stared at Ethan like ghosts from another life. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The guests whispered among themselves, unsure whether this was part of the ceremony or an uninvited interruption. Ethan's parents sat near the front row, visibly shaken, their guilt written all over their expressions. Ethan stepped forward, his boots echoing against the marble floor. He didn't rush. He moved deliberately, each step calculated, each breath controlled. This wasn't just about anger, it was about making a statement. Jake clung tightly to his father's hand, his small frame trembling but resolute. When Ethan reached the center aisle, he stopped. His piercing gaze swept across the room, landing first on Sarah, then on David. Finally, he locked eyes with his parents, who avoided his stare altogether. The silence was deafening. "Sarah," Ethan began, his voice cold and steady, cutting through the hushed whispers like a blade. "David." His tone sent shivers down everyone's spines. There was no yelling, no dramatic outburst, just pure, icy resolve. It was worse than any scream could have been. "I see you've made yourselves comfortable," Ethan continued, his words dripping with sarcasm. "A wedding? Really? Did you think I wouldn't come back? Or did you assume I'd die overseas, so you could take everything without guilt?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet, wilting under Ethan's glare. David, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably, trying to maintain his composure, but failing miserably. Ethan let the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "You betrayed me, not just as a husband, but as a friend." He turned slightly toward David. "And you," his voice hardened further. "You stole my family, my trust, my life. You thought you could replace me. But let me make one thing clear: you will never be me." The congregation gasped collectively. Some attendees exchanged nervous glances, while others leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. A few even pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. Ethan knelt beside Jake, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This isn't your fault, buddy," he said softly, breaking the tension momentarily. Then, rising to his full height, he addressed the crowd. "To those of you wondering what kind of man I am, know this: I don't seek vengeance lightly, but betrayal demands consequences, and today you'll witness the beginning of mine." With that, Ethan turned and walked out of the church, pulling Jake along with him. As the heavy wooden doors closed behind them, the stunned silence gave way to chaos. Guests erupted into frantic conversations, while Sarah collapsed into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. David tried to console her, but his own panic was evident. Outside, Ethan took a deep breath, letting the cool night air wash over him. He glanced down at Jake, whose wide eyes mirrored the whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. "What happens now, Dad?" Jake asked hesitantly. Ethan smiled faintly, though there was steel in his expression. "Now, we fight back." As they disappeared into the darkness, the seeds of retaliation were already taking root in Ethan's mind. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was rightfully his. It was about dismantling the web of lies and deceit that had been woven in his absence. And Ethan Walker was nothing if not thorough. The war had begun. The first shot in any war is often silent, but its impact reverberates for years. Ethan didn't waste time mourning the life he'd lost. Instead, he channeled his anger into action. That night, after tucking Jake into bed and ensuring his son felt safe, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a laptop, a notepad, and a steely determination. He wasn't just going to confront Sarah and David. He was going to dismantle them. Using skills honed during his military career, Ethan began investigating every aspect of their lives. Financial records, business dealings, social connections. It all came under scrutiny. What he uncovered shocked even him. David had been siphoning funds from Ethan's company, using forged documents to claim ownership. Meanwhile, Sarah had secretly filed for divorce months earlier, citing abandonment, a lie designed to paint Ethan as an absent father. But the betrayal ran deeper. Ethan discovered that his own parents had played a role in orchestrating the takeover. They believed David would provide stability for Jake and protect the family legacy. To them, Ethan's prolonged absence made him expendable. Fueled by rage, but disciplined by experience, Ethan decided on a two-pronged approach. Expose the truth and strike where it hurt most: their reputations. He reached out to Marie Rodriguez, an ex-military intelligence officer turned private investigator. Known for her razor-sharp instincts and unyielding ethics, Marie agreed to help after hearing Ethan's story. Together, they devised a plan to gather irrefutable evidence of David and Sarah's crimes. By the end of the week, Ethan had assembled a dossier thick with incriminating details: fraudulent bank transfers, falsified legal documents, and recorded conversations implicating everyone involved. But this wasn't about quick revenge. It was about precision. Every move would be calculated, every blow devastating. As Ethan prepared for battle, he reminded himself why he was doing this. Not just for justice, but for Jake. His son deserved a future free from lies and manipulation. In war, information is power, and Ethan Walker held all the cards. Ethan unleashed his first salvo quietly but effectively. Using anonymous channels, he leaked select pieces of evidence to key figures, investors, journalists, and influential members of the community. Within days, whispers of scandal spread like wildfire. David's business empire crumbled almost overnight. Investors pulled out en masse when news broke of embezzlement and financial misconduct. Banks froze accounts linked to suspicious activity, leaving David scrambling to salvage what little remained. Meanwhile, Sarah's career as a school administrator imploded when emails surfaced revealing her involvement in the scheme. Parents demanded her resignation, and the school board complied without hesitation. Ethan's parents weren't spared either. Their roles in facilitating the betrayal became public knowledge, tarnishing their once sterling reputation. Social circles ostracized them, and long-standing business partnerships dissolved. For the first time in decades, they faced consequences for their actions. But Ethan wasn't done yet. He knew the emotional toll of betrayal could be just as crippling as the financial fallout. Leveraging his military training, he orchestrated psychological warfare. Subtle reminders of their guilt appeared everywhere, in the form of anonymous letters, cryptic phone calls, and strategically timed leaks. Each incident chipped away at their confidence, leaving them paranoid and desperate. Despite the chaos, Ethan remained calm and focused. This wasn't personal anymore, it was strategy. And he was winning. When love turns to war, children become the ultimate prize. With David and Sarah reeling from the fallout, Ethan turned his attention to the most important fight of all: custody of Jake. Knowing they wouldn't give up easily, Ethan anticipated their next move. They filed for full custody, claiming he was emotionally unstable and unfit to raise a child. The courtroom became the new battleground. Sarah tearfully testified about Ethan's supposed neglect during his deployment, painting him as an absentee father. David echoed her claims, portraying himself as the stable, loving figure Jake needed. But Ethan had prepared for this moment. With Marie's help, he presented overwhelming evidence disproving their allegations. School reports showed Jake excelling, academically and emotionally, under Ethan's care. Neighbors testified to his dedication as a parent. Most damningly, recordings revealed Sarah admitting she only wanted custody to secure alimony payments. Jake himself took the stand, bravely, recounting how his mother and David had lied to him about Ethan's return. "I want to live with my dad," he declared firmly, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. The judge ruled in Ethan's favor, granting him sole custody. As Sarah and David left the courthouse defeated, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Justice had been served for now. Revenge isn't sweet, it's methodical, and Ethan Walker was nothing if not thorough. Ethan delivered the final blows with surgical precision. First, he exposed David's stolen valor. Years of pretending to be a decorated veteran unraveled when Ethan released proof that David had never served. The revelation destroyed David's credibility, costing him endorsements, speaking engagements, and any remaining shred of respect. Next, Ethan filed a massive lawsuit against both David and Sarah, seeking damages for fraud, defamation, and emotional distress. Criminal charges followed, ensuring they'd face jail time if convicted. Their attempts to flee the country were thwarted when international authorities flagged their passports based on Ethan's tip-offs. Meanwhile, Ethan ensured his parents paid dearly for their betrayal. He cut them off financially, severing ties completely. Stripped of wealth and influence, they retreated into obscurity, haunted by their mistakes. As the dust settled, Ethan stood victorious, but not vindictive. This wasn't about hatred, it was about restoring balance. By dismantling those who had wronged him, he reclaimed not just his life, but his dignity. 5 years later, Ethan Walker proved that true strength lies not in destruction, but in rebuilding. 5 years passed, and Ethan thrived. He transformed his company into a successful security firm, leveraging his military expertise to protect others. Jake grew into a confident young man, excelling in school and sports. Together, they built a new life filled with love, trust, and purpose. Ethan remarried, a kind-hearted woman named Claire who understood his past and supported his journey toward healing. She brought warmth back into their home, creating a sense of family Jake had longed for. As for Sarah, David, and Ethan's parents, their lives spiraled further into ruin. Shunned by society and burdened by legal fees, they lived in disgrace, unable to escape the shadows of their choices. In the final scene, Ethan addressed a group of cadets at a military academy. Standing tall in his uniform, he spoke of resilience, integrity, and the importance of fighting for what's right, not out of vengeance, but out of principle. Justice isn't about tearing others down, he concluded. It's about rising above, no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how heavy the loss. Remember this: you have the power to rebuild, and sometimes the greatest victory is simply moving forward. The camera panned to Jake, sitting proudly in the audience as Ethan smiled faintly. Redemption had come, not through revenge, but through renewal.